Hi, everyone. In Chapter 23 of your textbook, The Building of European Supremacy, Society, and Politics to World War I, there is a large series of changes happening in Europe. First of all, we see the development of what's known as the Second Industrial Revolution. The First Industrial Revolution was very basically an industrial revolution that was based on things like textiles, steam, and iron, whereas the Second Industrial Revolution, as you see on page 567, is based on steel, chemicals, electricity, and petroleum, oil. In this period in European history, there is a growth of the modern urban society as we know it. There is an enlargement of the working class. There are massive demographic changes. There is lots of external and internal migrations. Populations start to shift. Population centers in urban areas start to develop as people flock in either from inside the country or outside of the country for jobs in large urban areas. This is a difficulty of economic instability as well, as the proletarianization of middle classes and artisans is developing, as people continue to fall down the social scale to the working classes where they only have their labor to sell on the open market. This is the area of the ascendancy of the middle classes, as it says on page 569, of the petty bourgeoisie, the white-collar workers, the lower middle classes, the new managerial society, the development of a consumer-based economy with retail stores, which give sort of new opportunity for employment to women. We see the development of the urban center with impacts to attempts to contain the impacts of very large and quick urban growth, with the development of public health and urban sanitation, with some attempts at sort of housing reform, and also, of course, new groups in society are agitating and demanding rights. The women's movement, the feminist movement, dates from the 1840s in America and around the same time in Europe as well. Working class women were certainly bearing a large brunt of these changes. The family demographic was changing. There was quite a bit of poverty. Some women, of course, had very little recourse into urban areas besides prostitution, but there were some jobs available. At the same time, however, there was also the development of sort of the cultural dominance of the middle and upper classes, where women are actually separated into the domestic sphere, encouraged to go out of the factories. They're being, go back into the home to take care of the domestic sphere. This sort of cult of domesticity, the Victorian separation of the sexes, is actually sort of a new development. The division of labor based on gender lines and so forth is a real reaction to the Industrial Revolution in a lot of ways. But many young women did have opportunities. Many of them, of course, were replaced by immigrant labor or by peasant labor of females in the workforce and so forth. But sort of middle class values become dominant in this period. It's important to note, though, that this is the same time that women start to agitate for more rights, for voting rights, or for certain reforms and concessions for the right to own property and so on and so forth. So we see the development of several feminist organizations around the world. On 581, there's also a discussion of Jewish emancipation. There is, as a result of the revolutions of 1848, a sense in Europe that ethnic minorities and different groups of people need to be given some sort of entree in society, or they may become disenfranchised and therefore turn to political radicalism. So Jews were actually emancipated in some areas of Europe, were allowed more or less equal rights, entry into the different centers of European life. Unfortunately, this also contributes to a rise of a new sort of anti-Semitism, race-based anti-Semitism, which becomes a large political movement in Europe, especially around the 1880s, the 1890s. It gets certainly more serious after the First World War. This usually happens anytime we see the incorporation of minorities, whether ethnic or religious or whatever, into societies around the world. So, at the same time Jews are emancipated, their lives are changing for the better. Many of them are deciding to assimilate into society, to dress and eat and, live like Germans or Frenchmen or wherever they're at. there is a backlash in the 1880s especially. We've seen the Dreyfus Affair already. But Jews become, under a cloud of suspicion in societies, which is really skeptical and sort of resentful about the fact that they are given equality, and we'll certainly return to that after the First World War. Probably one of the biggest changes in this period is the growth in the working class, and we see on page 582 the emergence of a new sort of trade unionism in the world. Workers are actually organizing themselves into trade unions to agitate for better working conditions, for better wages, for shorter working hours, and so forth. We see an attempt to broaden the franchise of democracy to include urban workers, to include them into the political process. This, of course, is rebuffed again and again, and as a result, we see a new sort of labor politics in this era, not only with independent trade unions, but also around 1864, we see the first attempts in an international organization of the working class. In 1864, the International Workingmen's Association was formed by British and trade unions, also with the involvement of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. They are now involved in politics. They believe that the Paris Commune was a sign that working class political organizing was going to continue. They really mourned the attack and the collapse of the Commune, the war against it. But they, in this period, in the 1860s and 70s, start to try to organize the working class along international lines to agitate and to enter into politics. So they sort of have a double-pronged strategy of bringing together trade unions that will work for the amelioration of the worst aspects of life of the working class. At the same time, they want to organize workers into democratic parties. And of course, Marxist socialism, as it was before the Russian Revolution, actually said that there was a absolute necessity for democracy. Democracy was the prerequisite for socialism, and they had a vision of socialism that was very different. It was democratic. It was as a matter of fact, it was a furthering of democracy into all aspects of life, meaning that in this period, the working class are becoming the majority, so therefore, democracy, if it is the rule by the majority, then therefore the working class should enter into politics and eventually by their majority status would take over the state. And the ultimate aim here, of course, was to abolish capitalism and to bring in a sort of era of equality to end capitalism and wage labor. The Marx, in the Communist Manifesto in 1844 had written that socialism should organize society to function along the lines of the ideas of to each according to his needs and from each according to his abilities. So the state would actually be abolished completely, and the world would be run by this sort of international working class movement. You can read about it in the textbook. I don't want to get too deep into it. But this is an attempt to put socialism along an organizational lines and internationally. We see in Germany the attempt to actually repress the Social Democratic Party, which becomes the largest socialist party in the world. From 1878 to 1891, the German Kaiser and the Chancellor, Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, actually outlaws the Socialist Party in this Kulturkampf, which is a sort of a cultural war against dissonant elements in Germany. But, of course, Germany emerges from this being actually the leader of international socialism. In 1889, the second international, the second Workingmen's International, is started. The first one had not lasted very long and had collapsed by the 1870s. So in 1889, we see the formation of the Second International, sort of an international federated body of socialist parties led by the German Social Democratic Party, Sozialdemokratische Partei Deutschlands, a little German for you there. And they put together actually a pretty big program of reform of democratic-style parliamentary politics, of trade unions, of organizing and radicalizing the working class with a view to actually winning elections. And they had this vision of society sort of evolving towards socialism in the future. Now, of course, there are growths of other movements, and most fatefully probably in Russia. There is no possibility whatsoever of democracy. There is some sort of semi-democracy in Germany, but none in Russia whatsoever. And as we see in Part 2, that will put a definite stamp on the Russian socialism and socialism in the world.